Good morning or afternoon, wherever you might be, and welcome to, I think this is day 4 of Land of Hope and Dreams, a celebration of Dave Marsh's work and vision. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen, and we have a terrific panel ready for the next hour. Who needs the music industry? With a great lineup of speakers. I just want to get a few housekeeping notes and thank yous out of the way first. This has been about a year and a half in the making, and we've really tried to make it a celebration not only of Dave Marsh, the person and the journalist and the radio host and the activist, but about his ideas and the people who have worked with him and around him and have carried out those ideas into the universe. And he's always tried to build bridges between music and politics, between performers and audiences. And our speakers come from everywhere, and they've also had a commitment to that same vision. Before we move on to the discussion, I do want to thank my fellow steering committee members. This has been a tremendous team effort. I don't remember if I introduced myself. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm one of the organizing committee, but it's been a tremendous effort on the part of myself, Danny Alexander, Chris Buhalis, Charles Hughes, Susan Martinez, Lauren Anke, Alexander Shashko, Craig Werner, and Daniel Wolf. David Cantwell was also there from the beginning with the idea to put together something like this in honor of Dave Marsh. I'd also like to thank our partners, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the University of Wisconsin-Madison Afro-American Studies Department, for their help in promoting the event. Also, the Rock Hall will be simulcasting the Spotlight conversation with Dave Marsh on their YouTube channel on May 14th. And all of these conversations are being simulcast live on our own YouTube channel and will be archived there as well. One last note, we do have closed captioning turned on. If you want to turn them off for your own viewing, you can go to the bottom of your screen, click on live transcript. There's an arrow to the right of it, and then click on hide subtitles. We're not opening the chat for these discussions, but we do welcome questions in the Q&A tab. If you enter your question there at any time during the discussion, we will pose as many questions as we have time for to the moderators when we wrap things up or before we wrap things up. So let's move on to our discussion of who needs the music industry. And for each of our panels, we do have a short video message or song from a couple of performers. In this case, Todd Snyder and Terry Buffalo Ware are going to be talking a little bit about Dave and this tremendous book, Louie Louie. Dave Marsh is one of the few writers I can think of who could write an entire book about just one song. And Louie Louie fits into the discussion, as you'll see once we get things going. So here is a couple of messages from Todd and Terry Buffalo Ware.
Okay, let's give it to him right now. This book was given to me by Dave Marsh, and he signed it. We met in Austin, but I've been enjoying his writing for years. So I love you, Dave. East Side.
Hey, Dave, Terry Buffalo Ware here. Just want to say that it's a real pleasure and an honor to know you and call you my friend. And you contributed to one of the highlights of my so-called career here when you wrote in your book, Louie Louie, signed to me, to my friend Terry Buffalo, who knows what duh, duh, duh really means. And that means a lot to me. Only one more thing to say is, me gotta go now. Me gotta go now. Me gotta go now. Let's go.
And with that, I'll welcome Charles Hughes to introduce our panel. Charles, take it away.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I just want to echo what others have said and will continue to say, but I hope that wherever you all are out there in the Zoomiverse, that you are doing some form of applause for Eric Schumacher Rasmussen for all of his technical and logistical work and miracles and other things. He is so essential to this work, and we thank him endlessly. My name is Charles Hughes. I'm a writer and a teacher originally from Wisconsin, now based in Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm so glad to be here to introduce this panel and this incredible conversation. I'm not going to go on too long because you all didn't show up to hear me, but I do just want to say a little bit. For anyone who knows Dave Marsh and Dave Marsh's work, we know that who needs the music industry is both a question and a statement, both a call and response. It is a rhetorical framework. It is a demand for action, and it is also a necessary reaction, both to the censorship, thievery, literal and figurative policing, and other assorted bullshit that the music industry continues to manifest. But it is also a response and a call within the transformational ways that artists, activists, and others have confronted these things and have remixed their own experiences and those of others. That question and that statement has served not only as one of Dave Marsh's central missions, but an invocation through which he enters and creates the many communities and alliances that represent his career-long conversation. That revolutionary rock and roll spirit, based as always in the music, is embodied today by our conversation that's going to tell us the truth and insist that we figure out our own answers to who needs the music industry and its many corollaries. To lead us in that conversation is Val Den. I will not read Val's full biography, which is available on our conference website, because otherwise I would be telling you a lot of things that you should hear, but I would take up too much time. So I will just say Val Den is a singer-songwriter, a booking agent, a manager, an advocate, a teacher, a former member of the board of directors for Folk Alliance International, current board member of the Live Music Society, which supports small venues, and the Canadian ambassador for the House of Songs, based in Austin, Texas. So it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Val Den.
I think I've done enough of these Zooms to get the program going. Anyways, thanks. I'm going to introduce the rest of our panel, and I will start off with Lee Ballinger. So Lee Ballinger is the West Coast editor of Rock and Rap Confidential, the magazine edited by Dave Marsh. It's known as the conscience of the music industry. Ballinger is a combat veteran of Vietnam who came out of the steel mills in Ohio to forge a career as a writer. He has written 4 books, and his work has appeared in publications ranging from the New York Times to the Village Voice, from Inside Sports to Rolling Stone. Cameron Crowe, Academy Award winner for Best Screenplay in 2003, said of Ballinger's short story, Voices in the Sky, a great piece of writing. There's not enough storytelling about the real world, that big, beautiful place outside between Hollywood and New York City. Love and War, my first 30 years of writing, gathers much of the best writing by Lee Ballinger. His new book, Love and War, is your ultimate greatest hits album of words, which I thought was a great quote. It's a collection of poems and tributes, short stories and articles, and it serves as a true American historical collection of our world around us. It's seen and experienced and eloquently written so that the average person can ultimately feel what Ballinger feels and has vividly brought to life with us through his book. So welcome, Lee. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Good to be here.
Next, I'd like to introduce Phyllis Pollock. She's a longtime music publicist who has represented numerous gold and platinum recording artists. Her past publicity clients have included many, including Marty Balin of the Jefferson Airplane, to multi-platinum rappers NWA. She's done publicity for the iconic album Straight Outta Compton. And while working press for that album, Pollock was also told to handle a letter that arrived at Priority Records attacking the group. It was sent by the FBI. After reading the letter, she contacted Dave Marsh, and the two of them wrote a cover story for the Village Voice, and which is amazing. It's locked out the name of it, exposing the letter and also the right-wing groups that encouraged the FBI to attempt to intimidate the Compton rappers. In addition to her work as a publicist and a music journalist, She has also written liner notes for several albums, including a reissue of Straight Outta Compton. And also Phyllis has also produced 3 albums released on EMI Capitol Records, the Hip Hop High series featuring Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and other hip hop royalty. Past clients also include people like Rodney King. She's had articles in Billboard Magazine, Cream, Metal, Larry Flint's Rip, Hit Parader, and more, and interviewed artists, just to name a few, like Frank Zappa, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Metallica, Megadeth, Grace Slick, John Anderson, Ronnie Wood, as well as hard rock and heavy metal artists, including Alice Cooper and Kiss. So welcome. And next, Mike Stark. Mike is a veteran broadcaster who has worked in all areas of the broadcasting business for over 50 years. In the mid-90s, he hosted his own weekly talk show on the legendary heavy metal station KNAC-FM while producing the station's daily morning show during the week. And in the late 90s, and until the show ended in 2020, he was a featured producer for the nationally syndicated Tom Joyner Morning Show, with his production pieces for the show being heard in over 100 markets throughout the country. Currently, Stark is the owner-operator, my gosh, it's in a full-service radio podcast host of, and it's blacked out because I copied and pasted it from White. So you're gonna have to tell me what it is there, and co-host of the Daily Mornings on the Beach show in Long Beach, and co-host of a podcast. Again, I did not read my notes and it got wiped out because it was.
No worries.
Thanks, sorry about that. I'm hoping that doesn't have that with Vernon's. Okay, anyway, welcome, thanks. And Vernon Reid, welcome. I'm so thrilled to have you on the panel as well. Guitarist, 2-time Grammy Award recipient Vernon Reid has been a musical force for 4 decades. Though best known as the founder and primary songwriter of the rock band Living Colour, he was also named number 66 on Rolling Stone's magazine 2003 list of one of the top 100 guitarists of all time. Breaking through on the avant-garde jazz scene on the Lower East Side with Decoding Society and Defunct, Reid has been musically building on that groundwork ever since. In 1985, he co-founded the Black Rock Coalition to confront racism in the music industry with journalist Craig Tate, who happens to also be speaking on our LHAD tribute to Marsh, and with producer Conda. As a founding member of the groundbreaking rock band Living Colour, their album debuted in 1988 with the double platinum record Vivid. They opened up for the Rolling Stones in 1989 Steel Wheels tour, and the band was also among one of the first acts on the Lollapalooza tours. Musical diversity through his solo projects in Mask, Yohimbi Brothers, studio work with Lady Gaga, The Roots, The Ramones, Public Enemy, film scores and Paid in Full, Ghost of Attica, Free Angela Davis, and All Political Prisoners. Additionally, he's worked with choreographer Bill T. Jones in 1994 on the 2-part dance project Still Here. And in 2017, he debuted Assembly Monthly broadcast on a streaming radio show, Home, and his show is titled An Underground Railroad of the Mind, and it's where he plays all vinyl records from his own collection for several hours. Currently, he is working on a variety of ventures, including a new solo album, a new soundtrack for the latest film directed by Brad Lichtenstein, and a book of his photographs. And there is an upcoming tour planned starting in July, where he will be on tour with his band Living Colour, and also it looks like with Everclear as joining them, and whose last album Shade was released in 2017. So welcome, Vernon, and thanks everybody. All right, here we are. So I wanted to start with actually asking, with Mike in radio, we were talking about the relationship between like producers and label owners, musicians, and the changing platforms of music and how it's distributed, and wondering how you think like where radio comes in as your voice in radio and curating music for your listeners. And yeah, and if you've been censored or told what you can and can't play.
Well, radio is a mess right now. That's the best I can say about radio. It's the industry I've spent 50 years in, and I sadly have to say it's a mess. And it's not just the censorship, there's a lot of other problems with what's going on in radio. But the censorship aspect did amp up in radio. The second that wardrobe malfunction happened in 2004, radio censorship went crazy. And the FCC started levying large fines and threatening large fines to radio stations all over the country. And it just made it tougher. You know, there was a time when we could get away doing, when I worked at KNAC, the heavy metal station, there was stuff we did on the air all the time that nobody blinked an eye at. But now they're, you know, they don't allow anything. I remember playing Star Star by the Stones on the air, and John Lennon's Working Class Hero. Those things could not be played today. There's just too much of a threat and too large of fines. The fines just went up again for radio stations. Now there's another side to that. The FCC has turned, they've monetized censorship. So they've raised the fines, but then on the other hand, it used to be anybody that filed a complaint, anybody could file a complaint about a radio operator, and the FCC would have to act on it. Well, the FCC has also monetized that part of it. So if you want to complain about a radio operator, you have to pay a fee to complain about it. So they're monetizing it on both ends. So I guess that's a good part, because people were complaining to the FCC over every little thing before. Now they have to think about it because they have to step up and pay some money. So right now radio is a mess. That's why I'm moving my stuff a little bit more towards podcasting. That's the best I can say for radio at this point, an industry that I dearly love.
So one other question too, like radio was kind of how we got to learn about these artists, and it would drive us to the record stores to go and buy these records. And now there's so much technology and everything involved. And so how do you see the industry has changed how we digest music?
Well, again, another problem with radio is everything is overly researched. They use call out research. They use all sorts of research that make sure that they play a record that no one will turn off. Well, consequently, we end up with a whole radio dial full of the same music and the same songs. They don't go any deeper than what, Joe Blow wants to hear, because they don't want to lose. They don't want somebody pushing that button. So, and then with all of the platforms, I tell people, go to the platforms if you want new music. You're not going to get it on the radio. There's no place that's playing new music that I know of. Maybe college stations, but other than that, everything's over researched. There needs to be an overall of radio. I'm hoping personally for the downfall of all corporate radio, and it goes back to the ma and pa's like it used to be, where there's actual radio people running the business. So.
Thanks. Hey, Phyllis, I wanted to ask you, you've mentioned before that you believe that music censorship will become an issue again in the future.
Oh, yeah.
And that Republicans are actually becoming more increasingly involved in our whole cancel culture, which they actually claim to oppose. And you mentioned about your interactions with Tipper Gore, and also that she denied that she was supporting censorship, and her whole anti-rock book that endorsed things like the Peters brothers, the pastors that gave their congregations instructions on how to burn books and all that. What shifts have you seen, and where are we going? What do you think we need to do to help, artists that are in this cancel culture and the whole idea around censorship? As a publicist and a journalist yourself, what do we need to do to help them succeed?
Well, this whole cancel culture thing in the music business, the only thing Tipper changed about it was bringing it into the political realm with the Senate hearing she got going. and of course the warning stickers. But this has been going on since Black artists were banned off jukeboxes down south by the KKK. And white artists were doing cover versions. This is nothing new. And actually, there is currently censorship a lot of people aren't aware of. There are labels that actually, you know, in many recording contracts, obviously, Vernon can speak on this more, although he probably hasn't had an issue with it, to my knowledge. There are actually, you know, the label has, you know, final say ultimately over what's on an album. I mean, they have a right to refusal, and they can refuse your album and make you go back and change things if they want. And there is an anonymous censorship committee at least one very major label where the lyrics are gone through and, you know, different decisions are being made. I personally do not believe we will ever see an album like Straight Outta Compton again, as far as, say, the song Fuck the Police. There are artists that are very political, but I think what people need to do is be very vocal about this and encourage artists to say no, because I can think of a long list of artists that I know allowed their albums to be censored. Names that all of you guys here would recognize. And that is an important issue. And I also think there's another issue that should be changed, which is a lot. Donald Trump was using a lot of people's music, and artists were firing off, having their attorneys fire off letters. The Stones, Tom Petty's estate, Elton John. I mean, so many artists, and these politicians are allowed to create this fake veneer that these artists are supporting their campaign. And I wish somebody could get a congressional hearing with artists saying, I don't want my music, my work abused in this way.
Yeah. Lee, you had your hand up. What do you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to touch on what Mike was saying. And when he said mom and pop radio, might have been romanticizing a little bit, but I feel him. My point would be, if we step back and look at the music industry, which has many facets as a whole, and we'll say the post-World War II era, I think Dave calls it the rock and soul era, that a lot of things happened that had a positive effect early on. For example, on the radio, payola. Yes, payola is bribing with drugs, prostitutes, whatever. It's disgusting. But what was its effect? Its effect was to get music on the radio that would not get heard. It had a racial connotation. It had a working class connotation. I might be the only person here old enough to remember what the radio was like before this process got underway. Let's just say it wasn't saving my life. And these sounds got on the radio, and that's how it happened. But everything positive that happened through the growth of the music industry has been turned into its opposite. Payola became, not just recently, it's been quite a while, a way to keep music off the radio. It became a thing where you could go down to pick a station anywhere with $1 million cash. You couldn't get a song on the radio because it was a closed small club. That's how music got on the radio. You couldn't get into it. And it was one of the factors and that's still going on, of course, that leads to what Mike was talking about, as far as, we'll just say all the music's great. Music's great, but such a narrow thing.
Yeah, so Lee, in Your Love and War is your ultimate, like, kind of, I love that someone wrote it was like your greatest hits album in words. I thought that was a great quote. So in your workings and your writings, is there any takeaway or a story that you can tell us, especially if you can bring Dave into it as well, about censorship or racism in the industry that might have changed the way you saw or even wrote about an artist's story? yeah, was there an inspiring story and knowing like the power of words? Like, so in the music industry, like what do we need to do to make sure that art and a political voice still are lifted and not censored? And do you have a kind of a story about censorship or racism in this industry that you've written about that you could share?
Well, I don't want to get in the way of what things I know Vernon's going to say. I don't specifically know what he's going to say, but I do remember going to see Living Color at the Palace in Hollywood back in the day. And on the way out, someone handed me a flyer for a meeting of something called the Black Rock Coalition that I was not aware of. So I went to the meeting. There was probably about 100 people there, and we got busy. So one of the things we did was put on a showcase at the Music Machine for the industry. The absurd context here is that we were asking the music industry, which was built primarily on Black music, to pay attention to Black music. Anyway, we set aside a section of the club for A&R people from the labels. Anyway, the place was packed. The show was great. We had Tori Ruffin with Civil Right. We had John, I can't remember his last name. He was the guitarist playing in Michael Jackson's touring band. Then he had a band there, other cool bands. Great show. There was only one thing missing. There was no one there from the labels. They weren't interested. Why should we be interested in them? Just exactly why do we need the music industry? And I think Dave is the first person I think that I ever heard that really raised this instead of just, this should be a little better or more, you should give more points, this, that. And certainly the first person I ever heard say that the fundamental business model of the music industry is to steal from artists. Although I've certainly subsequently heard many artists say the same thing. And along those lines, I remember talking with Fred Wilhelms, the late great Nashville music business attorney. Fred was a close friend of Dave's. We worked very closely together. I met him through Dave. We all worked on various worthy projects, including getting artists paid, although isn't that the job of the industry, to pay the artists? Anyway, Fred described how he began his law career in the New Jersey construction industry, which Fred described as highly corrupt. He said he had to change his definition of highly corrupt when he started working in the music business. And we're still there today.
We are. This is a great segue over to Vernon. You've had a lot of success in the music industry, or in music. I don't have to say music industry as a musician, as a songwriter. Can we marry them both? And you've been a great champion with great passion for Black artists. You've also been a force in seeking to improve opportunities for Black musicians and raising people's consciousness, was a quote that I found of yours. You said the career prospects are grim for a Black musician who falls outside the rigid stylistic confines of the urban contemporary sound. Black musicians who don't rap, croon romantic ballads, or make good timey party records usually find themselves locked out of both Black and white markets. Do you feel labels, or even how do you feel about labels, understand how to market you, how to market Black artists in general? And can you talk about racism in the industry and how do we navigate careers in this very white male-oriented industry as well?
We only have about 30 minutes left. So
I know.
It's a long, I think Lee mentioned one word that is my favorite when I speak about race, and that's the absurdity. There's a certain baseline absurdity about what we're expected to live with and accept as quote unquote normality. And that's part of the fundamental issue around. It's not so much it's because whiteness is equated with normalcy. This is normal, right? And things like, I was thinking about this phrase, officer discretion. Now, officer discretion means a lot. When people talk about, well, in a situation, you should just comply with the officer. But the thing about that is, when you connect that to the officer's discretion, the officer decides he wants to teach a lesson to the neighborhood. He wants to teach a lesson, which that lesson is not really that unrelated to terrorism. You know what I mean? When you consider things like a Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when an entire city was kind of not just ransacked and destroyed, but they used crop planes to drop, improvised explosive devices, right? And they're still using ground radar to find the mass graves of the victims. That's part of the background. That happened in 1921. Now consider the fact of Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong, the great, iconic trumpeter and vocalist from New Orleans. He extraordinary career. He influenced so many vocalists. In fact, the sound of modern vocals would be utterly different without Louis Armstrong. But Louis Armstrong had to coexist with Al Jolson. Nobody talks about Al Jolson now. It's as if Al Jolson, the beloved Jolie, the jazz singer in blackface, has been completely erased from the discussion. Duke Ellington and Count Basie had to coexist with this artist who was popular, whose whole shtick was imitating and mocking Black people. That's a fraction of what this is about. And this is played out all the way to now. I'm very grateful for my career. And I felt, I think about the CBGB days. Living Color existed because of CBGBs. And Hilly Crystal, I'll get verklempt if I talk about him too much. So I will limit my conversation about Hilly, because Hilly also worked at the Vanguard. And Hilly was there when John Coltrane was changing the world. Right? So that's to put it in context. He heard what I was trying to do, and he gave me a chance. Right? So there have been people along the way that have encouraged me of all different races along the way. It's remarkable when I consider Mick Jagger, because Mick Jagger, I auditioned to play on one of his solo records, and the audition didn't do. It was a cattle call. Like, everybody that had a fret showed up, and it was bananas. But he said to me, "You know what? I heard your band is good. I'm going to come see you at CBGB's." And I was like, "What?" And he came through, blah, blah, blah. Now, up to that point, we'd gone through the farm system like all other bands, right? You get a following, the A&R people come, they see the room is packed, they hear the tunes, and they make the offers. Except for the fact that we'll get to a certain place in getting offers, and we would get routinely rejected. There would be an A&R person would champion. It would go up the flagpole, and the person in charge would not salute. And so Mick Jagger, when he came into my life, Mick Jagger was actually, and he still is, the most famous person in rock. When you think of rock and roll, people think of Elvis, Hendrix, and Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger's. So, in other words, it took, and even though I'm grateful for it, for Living Color to get the next shot, it took the most famous person in rock and roll at that time to endorse us, or we wouldn't have gotten a deal. And that to me, on the one hand, it's great, but it's also the fact that it took someone like, for my band, for us to just do what we wanted to do with our music, underlines the level of oppression. And you know what? And when we got signed, I'm thinking, here the floodgates are going to open. And, there were bands that came, like Rage Against the Machine got it shot. You know what I mean? But it's nothing like this kind of floodgates. It didn't open for so many artists and bands. And, Aluta continue, the struggle continues.
So is there anything you would have done differently, or maybe you're doing different this time, or that you in the industry now? Is there anything that you?
We had a, you know, at one point with the Black Rock Coalition, it there was a discussion like we should become a label. Should we become a label? And I was on the we should become a label. And because we were a community organization, and it was basically no, we should stay grassroots. And it really became a question of, will we become the monster that we oppose if we do that? And I was I was on the other side of that question, and other founders were, you know, so that for me is a thing. But I understand, I respect that decision was made at that time. But I would have had a recording division of the organization, but I understand why that didn't happen.
Yeah, and to give people some background, if they're not aware, the Black Rock Coalition opposes the racist and reactionary forces in the American music industry, which deny Black artists and the expressive freedom and economic rewards that their Caucasian counterparts enjoy. As a matter of course, we too claim the right of creative freedom and total access to American and international airwaves, audience, and markets. I wanted to make sure that the people out there aren't aware of what the Black Rock Coalition is.
You read it well. Thank you.
And also, you said something that you said the Black Rock Coalition says rock and roll is the music of our forefathers, and we are the heirs to that music.
And mothers too. You know, I tell you, it's a scandal that Sister Rosetta Tharpe is not in the forefront of. I mean, Little Richard was her protege. You know what I mean? And he was a fan of hers. And Sister Rosetta Tharpe, as a badass guitar player she was, like, when we consider the great guitarists, you know, I'm telling you, it's only in the last 10, 20 years that her name has really come up, except for like people down deep in the know. I mean, Sister Rosetta, and she was a superstar in her day, and she had been completely, you know, left out of the discussion. So yeah, so at that point when that was written, you know, we weren't even aware of Sister Rosetta Tharpe, which is about, you know, how information gets passed down and what people talk about. Chuck Berry, hosannas to Chuck Berry, of course, you know, but if you consider it in the lineage, you'd say Chuck Berry, and you have to say Sister Rosetta Tharpe, you know, right along. As you're going to talk about T-Bone Walker and Charlie Christian, you would have to put Sister Rosetta Tharpe in that lineage. And for a long time, that was not the case. And just objectively hearing her, you know, as a singer and as a guitarist, I mean, come on, you know what I mean? But that's also about not just racism, but also sexism in the scenario.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm going to kind of open it up and just a free flow here too. And just I don't know if Dave's out there with us or where he's at today, but kind of a Dave story or a way, if someone wants to jump in with a 1 or couple minute story of Dave's influence on us and how we saw music, or and how he inspired us to be activists, or just a story. Yeah, something.
I would love to, if I could. I used to spend a lot of time with Frank Zappa in his basement at night in the studio, and we obviously we were both very involved in the anti-censorship thing that Tipper Gore was doing. And one night Frank asked me something about Dave Marsh, and I said, I don't know him. He thought I was joking, and he goes, no, really. And I said, I don't know him. And he was on me. He goes, I'm going to give you his phone number right now. And Frank was on me for like 2 weeks to call him. You know, Frank would call me up, or I'd be over there, and he'd be like, have you called Dave? And so finally I called Dave. And then a couple of weeks later, Dave responded to my message, and it was almost life-changing. When we ended up writing that story, the cover story for the Village Voice, yeah, we weren't just talking about rap music or NWA. We were talking about what was going on with the police and the Black community. And of course, Tipper found out and sent Dave and I a letter, as well as the Voice, threatening to sue us if she was mentioned in the article. And obviously we didn't care and mentioned her extensively. And anyway, it was that day that the FBI started a file on me, when the day the article came out, which I thought was interesting because all we talked about was fear of music and the police harassing young Black men and music censorship. But I guess this warranted an FBI file. But Dave really encouraged me to fight for what I believed in. And he also, when it came to writing, he really hammered it into me to make it personal, to really feel passion when you write, and to not hold back your emotion, whatever it is. Do not be dispassionate when you write about music. And I thought that was a really important point. And Dave just cares so deeply about people and causes. And I feel blessed to have met him and to know him and consider him a friend.
Nice. Lee, Mike, anybody have a inspiration or a good story or anecdote about our friend Dave?
Well, I was trying to think whether I met Lee first or Dave first. But I think I met.
You look about the same.
Yeah, right. But I did meet Dave in person through Steve Probst, who wrote the Christmas book with Dave. And Steve was doing a radio show. So I came down and grabbed Dave after he went on his show and did a short interview with him. I knew about his politics. I knew about his writing, of course. But after that interview, I could see the passion for both, for the music and the politics. And I said to myself, this is a guy I want to conduct a lot of interviews with. And so over the years, he and I have spent hours. I think I have probably the largest audio collection of Dave Marsh interviews on the planet, because he was always open to discussing just about anything, politics, music, or whatever. And like Phyllis, he changed the way I look at the whole picture of music and all of that. So he also called me to work on a project. He was doing an oral history of various artists, and he called me to do the Black Sabbath version of that. So I was always appreciative of him getting me in my first book deal, basically. And then over the years, while he was doing the Sirius XM show, I've contributed various production pieces to his show, and we've had a great relationship. I love Dave.
Amazing. So go ahead.
Okay.
Lee, please. Yeah.
Well, first, I tell you how I met Dave. I was working in a steel mill in Ohio, and my first book came out, which was about sports. And in the course of writing that book, I became a member of this group called the Society for American Baseball Research, which has you get a directory of all the members, Dave was in there, and it has your address and phone number. So when I was in New York doing media, I called him up, and he doesn't know me at all. He says, "Come on over." It's probably, in the early evening. And so we stayed up all night talking about stuff, and everything we ever did together, you know, kind of flowed from that. And you know, if you weren't right there with us, or maybe if you read RRC for many years, you would know some of the stuff he did. But a lot of, I mean, like say the Sun City Project, that was pretty visible. We were all involved in promoting it and this and that, but he wrote the book for it. But a lot of this stuff, much less so. For example, we did these Art Meets Labor events all over the country. The first one was in Manhattan, and you know, Vernon said, you know, he has a gig later today, and he's here. Well, we had this gig where he brought people from steel mills and this, that, and the other, and bus drivers and this, and with a lot of artists. Ruben Blades came on his way to a gig at Madison Square Garden. John Mellencamp flew in while he was on tour. And part of it, of course, is what it's about. But all these things are inseparable from Dave. Not that he's not a charming, wonderful person who never loses his temper, but his track record. He has a track record, and socially, politically, and especially within the music industry. So we did that event, which also had a whole bunch of people from. That was when rap was getting its head above water. A bunch of those folks were there. Dave was both a champion, initiator of that whole process, and certainly gave full encouragement to me or anybody else. There were no boundaries, none whatsoever. We did that there. We did it in Philly. We did it in Rapid City. We did it in Omaha. We did it in Lincoln, Nebraska. We did a somewhat similar event in Nashville, and then we got connected to pirate radio, which is at that time. Now there's a legal low power FM. The whole landscape's kind of changed. I think Mike is a star of low power FM in Long Beach, but then it was totally illegal and it was growing. So we got connected to the Black Rose of Zoom Black Magic Radio in Fresno. Dave just jumped in with 2 feet. We made a lot of other connections. There was a couple of national, maybe international conventions of these guys. Dave was a part of that. Similarly with censorship, like anything that happens in America that's in opposition to something that needs to be opposed, there's kind of a, I don't know what words to use because I'm not trying to be negative, but there's kind of an official opposition of NGOs or, you know, professional people and all that. That's all good. And then there's something down on the grassroots level, and they generally don't meet. Dave was down there like Rock Out Censorship, which was a bunch of guys in Jewett, Ohio, population 600. I see Phyllis laughing. John Woods, Kirby Stokes, Randy Payton. And they put out a newsletter. They put out an international newspaper. John's house is like an outhouse in the middle of the woods. From this little outpost, they went on tours with Metallica. We're going to be heard. And Dave, you know, rather than, well, you're not from the, you know, the Society for whatever, and you're not getting grants, and that whole way of approaching problems, he again embraced them totally and opened doors for them. There wasn't a separation. We were one. And I can't say it was never done by anyone else. That's not my point. I will say from considerable experience, it's somewhat unusual. And Dave was certainly, he was one of the best at understanding why it was important and doing what needed to be done and putting people together. And of course, putting people together who might be quote unquote rock stars with the folks from the street.
Yeah.
And that might not seem like a lot, but start making a list of the times that that's happened directly, person to person. I can't think of too many.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things with Dave is a connector, and how he the boundaries just be from grassroots to the big stars and all that he has a way of bringing people together for common cause and and to make them passionate. So we've now had this crazy year and a half of lockdown. The live music stopped, and we all try to recalibrate. And the question was, who needs the music industry? Now it feels like it's kind of opening up again. And like, who needs the music industry? How do we navigate this new? I think our people are going to be so starved for live music. I think we got so to a point where you could go to a show, and whether it's Austin, LA, New York, and then leave, go get a bite to eat, go to another show. And we just consumed it just kind of like junk food in a sense. And all of a sudden it was taken away from us, and we became zoomed. We digested music differently. Now it feels like it's opening up a bit. Like Vernon, you're going to be on tour. What changes? What changes do you see happening? Let's talk about even like technology and how we've digested all of this, and what do we want to see it happen now? It's almost like we got this pause and the world stopped, and now it feels like it's kind of opening up again. Is there changes that anyone would like to see? And just how the music industry, as we open up now, where do you think we're going?
Oh, you know what? There's a technological thing that I think really needs to happen with Zoom platforms and these kind of platforms, one-to-one platforms, and that's dealing with latency in real time, the ability for people to play together in real time, and for things to happen in time together, without the need for ISDN lines, but it's something that can happen over Wi-Fi that works that way. Also for people DJing, I tell you, I've seen a few of these situations where there are DJs and people try to dance to DJ music on Zoom, and it's not a good look. It's not. You're grooving to something. The people watching you, you're grooving to something you think you're hearing, and trust me, you're off. And that's something, a really practical thing, because the thing about it, as things open up, I think this idea of teleconferencing and connecting this way isn't going to go away. And if this was it, I mean, we're hoping that this gets de-emphasized, but at the same time, there needs to be a technological advance in this, because surprise, we have variants and all kinds of things that are going on, and the idea that this is over it's not over. Right. So a technological fix needs to come in terms of, certainly for artists and people to collaborate in real time.
Yeah.
I'll just add to that from a radio standpoint. When all of this started, radio people had to readjust how they did things, how they did shows and how they did all of that. And we used Zoom and Skype a little bit prior to all of this, but we really kind of put it aside. And now radio has integrated this, and television to some degree too. Radio has integrated this right into everyday living. Now, it doesn't have the intimacy of gathering people around a table in a studio. It never has that. But I do believe that as a broadcaster, we learned a lot with this that we can use in the future, and use both a live studio and this as a way of moving things forward. It's just another tool to make radio better, if that's what radio wants to do. Again, I'm back to that. I know there's a radio panel that'll probably discuss a lot of this, but from my point of view, the technology has been great. It has been improved. These companies have stepped up. Vernon talked about the problem with the delays and all that. It used to be a lot worse. It needs to get better, but it used to be really bad. there was a huge delay. You couldn't do radio with the delay that they used to have. They've improved the technology. So yes, it needs to get better, but I think it's here to stay in some form. So.
Also, I think part of the problem, I've given it so much thought over the years. By the way, Lee, thanks for bringing up that BRC gig at the Music Machine. That was a great night. That was a great night. But anyway, the fact that when you look through your old 45s and albums, there were so many great independent labels. Oh my God, some of the greatest music didn't come from the majors. It came from, eventually a lot of them got bought out, like Stax, and I could name tons of other labels. But part of the problem is so much of the power is within the hands of very few people, of which are corporations. And it needs to go back somehow to grassroots. And of course, that Mike, with radio is not going to support any record, at least terrestrial, right? I mean, terrestrial radio is not going to support any music that does not sanctioned with the magic hand of one of the major labels. And somehow there has to be I just think there's not going to be much change unless fans really get involved in social media and make an issue out of these things, music fans. But I don't know that that's ever going to happen. But I think any kind of way we can support independent labels, that is where a change is going to come.
I have to speak to this, and this is something that Dave instilled in me from the beginning. And I spend a lot of time interviewing indie, unsigned, and small label artists. I spend most of my shows are dedicated to that, for that very reason that Phyllis is talking about. They need to get some exposure, and I do my best to do that. And there is so much great music that gets unheard because they're small labels. And a lot of the artists, in talking to artists, up and coming artists and indie artists and unsigned artists, there are so many that really would rather not get involved with a record label at this point. They'd rather do it themselves. There's a lot of work involved beyond making music, and that's a problem, I think. But they would prefer it. A couple artists I've talked to have been on major labels and got off of them. They went back to doing it themselves. And I think the more we can support those indie and unsigned artists, and they're putting together small labels, and that's the route I personally am going in terms of exposing music on the radio, because you're not going to get it through corporate radio at all.
I would like to point out that the problems that we have did not start with COVID. Right. And even the problems that have been exacerbated with COVID, 40% of the people in the United States cannot pay their rent. They ain't buying no music. When we can have shows, they ain't going to no shows. And these various programs, half-assedly applied as they are for rent moratoriums, they're going to go away. We can't have a really vibrant, thorough music scene, fuck the industry, scenes, when almost half the people cannot participate. So I think not just, my vision isn't go back, let's look forward. And I would say, I just want to share a verse from a song written by a guy that Dave Marsh used to hang out with at a certain time quite a bit. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. That's the salvation of music. That last line, that's just my crap. John Lennon said, he probably said it, but it's not in the song.
Well said, Lee. Well said. Yeah. So so here we are, and people can't afford to get music, or we're digesting music from the industry. We're being fed singles where you don't listen. Like, it used to be so important. You would have a record and how much energy was spent, and still is, for the sake of the art, on the sequencing of a record, and how much time and energy that we put in, that you were taking this album and you were being told the story, and you consumed it as a piece. And now everything goes out and it's like a Spotify playlist, or you're releasing, singles as they come out. And now vinyl has kind of made this nice comeback and everything. Or, like, for you, Vernon, when you're looking to record, do you still record in a sense like that, where it's a whole piece? And do you feel like we feed audiences just like bits and pieces, and we've stopped creating like that full experience?
Well, I mean,
the industry drive us that way.
well,
now.
everything is, so the things that we're bemoaning is really because of convenience, right? Because the thing is, we have to think about what the actual meaning of music to people in their actual lives. Now, the fact that you had to go to a place to purchase the thing, to bring back the thing, to put onto the other thing, to play the thing, to hear it, you had to be invested. You had to invest your time. I mean, as well as your money. You had to go to the corner, or go to wherever, or you had to go to Tower, you know what I mean, or Coconuts, or wherever you went, or Amoeba, and do the thing. And now that the convenience of it has also kind of debased it on a level in terms of people's passion for it. Also, we're under assault. Like, we're under assault by every other thing taking up our time. That's the other part of what's happening in the modern world. So when I think about it, music, and, I think the narratives still matter, like the flow of a song to the next song. This is the 50th anniversary of What's Going On, and that sequence of that album.
Right.
It's a crucial narrative. When I think about Eugene McDaniels, his record, his very underground record, the Horseman of the Apocalypse record, incredible album, had great Alfonso Mouzon on drums. There's a sequence to it. Now, individual songs can be incredibly powerful, and individual songs can almost have a sequence within them. And that's sort of what artists are doing. They're putting whole narratives within individual songs. But for me, I came up with albums. Albums made a huge difference in my life. And still, there are records that are coming out that like Dominique Fike had an album. He's a pretty new artist, young artist. And his album, I went and bought his record because of the title. And the title of his album is What Could Possibly Go Wrong? And that completely drew me in. And it's a really good record.
So we started off the hour with the Louie from Terry Buffalo Ware and Todd Snyder, and Dave's book about, amazing that a man can write a book centered around one song. Phyllis, you had mentioned you had something that you had wanted to say about that, and just to kind of bring us around to, is there a current Louie approach to the music, and just your take on that? You had said
okay. That book, and he brought up the fact that Dave wrote an entire book about one song, is exemplary of the passion that I think everyone here in this panel has for music, which Dave obviously shares. That book, to me, represents so much that of the whole spirit of stuff. And, you mentioned singles. When I was growing up, I remember like being young and junior high school. It was a very tribal experience to almost to listen to music, you know, like after school or whatever, we would all sit around and listen to an album. And it was almost ceremonial, you know, with your friends to discuss the album and break it down and everything about it. The cover, the liner notes, whatever. And it seems now that the way music is being marketed, it's just an ambient thing in the background. It's not taken as seriously as an art by the labels. It's like junk food, you know, 10 million sold. And I think we really need to hold on. The people that really care need to hold on to the passion, you know, for, you know, whether it's one song or two, you know, the 7,000 albums you happen to have in the other room. It's just that passion is everything. And that passion for the music, you know, is what's going to keep you fighting about all the things that we've been talking about. And I want to just say one last thing about Dave and the censorship thing that he really hammered on, which was really true. When Tipper was doing her campaign and doing press, she always made sure to say that she started the PMRC over a Prince album. At that time, there were albums, metal albums that had songs about necrophilia, sex with dead people, and I mean, way past anything on Darling Nikki. And Dave really made a point of questioning Tipper about why is it a Black artist? And, you know, so many Black artists have been treated as kind of the black sheep or the bastard children of the music industry. And I think those of us that are passionate need to speak up more and educate people about music history, you know, what's going on. I was fortunate. I was a music major, you know, and of course, you know, we studied history of jazz and all of this and in context to the times in which artists like Billie Holiday or whoever, you know, was going through what they were going through. And in addition to, you know, having to analyze a piece of music. And I think it's really important that we get back to the passion of an album and not just treat it as a single that's playing in the background while you're cleaning the house or whatever. Music is more important than that. It's everything.
So how do we inspire and teach this generation now about music and social change and like what's the lesson that we can give to them? Because I look at my son who works in the industry as a talent curator and mixing and how he digested music, which he learned music because we would go to Dave's house, and so that Dave and I could talk, he would send my son Taylor upstairs into Dave's cave for him to explore and find music. He's lucky he got to hear records before they came out and then be explained why, because my son was way into hip hop and it was important that Dave wanted to teach him the hip hop and the political side of it. So he's
right.
So he grew up with, you know, we went through the Mudvayne, the Slipknot stage, and then thank God we got into Rage Against the Machine, System of a Down, Eminem. I mean, we shifted.
Kendrick is also doing some important stuff too, I think.
Who's that?
Kendrick.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's talking about some important things in some of his music too, if you're getting your son into hip hop. But I mean, there's so much more. I mean, it annoys me that the tone of the music industry right now, the major labels seem to be, okay, what's the next rap, you know, record we can throw out there? And it's just so much of it has been garbage. And some of it, I think, has been the worst cultural appropriation, you know. I mean, like Iggy Azalea, I resigned from being a Grammy voter when she went into the final round. It made no sense. I don't know if anyone knows who I'm talking about, Iggy Azalea, if you've ever heard one of her records. But I was so deeply offended by the entire concept. It goes back to what Vernon was saying about Al Jolson. I mean, to me, that's what it was. To me, it was just the same thing and marketed towards like 8-year-old girls. And here's going to be another stupid generation of kids when it comes to music and life. And I resigned. I just got uninvolved.
So, it's interesting talking about music and young people. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she's turned me on to artists like No Name and Her, who are some of my favorite people. But at the same time, it's interesting, like she would be going to school and one day I saw her in a Living Color t-shirt. I never encouraged her, to, you know what I mean? It wasn't like she just did it on her own. And one day I played her How Can I Be Sure by the Rascals.
Oh yeah.
And How Can I Be Sure is one of the greatest vocal performances. I mean, it's been covered many times, but that original is un-F-withable. Right. But the thing about How Can I Be Sure is there's something about that tune that's a little creepy, which is part of its magic. It's about male passion, but there's an undercurrent that's a little troubling if you listen to it really carefully. And I was talking to my daughter about this in the kitchen. I said, listen to this tune. And I just let her listen to it. And then one day we were in the car and she had put it in one of her playlists, on her own, and then one day I saw that she was listening to Electric Light Orchestra, which I never talked to her about. So she's turned me on to new music and she's discovering older music because she's exploring it. And, it's as good as it gets, pretty much.
I want to refer to a panel that was done last night by Danny Alexander with Little Steven. And he's doing this whole teach rock thing, which is doing exactly what we're talking about with young people in the schools themselves and tying music into all aspects of the curriculum, which I think is a great thing. And hopefully that'll expand as well. And that's really important because that takes care of the whole picture of what we're trying to get to.
Crucial. There needs to be that kind of thing with hip hop where you play the sample, you play the cut, and then play the records that the samples came from. I mean,
exactly.
Play the,
That's quite a point.
play the meters, play the meters, play the play the Weather Report record, play, where Tribe Called Quest got that from, play the different musics and connect them instead of demonizing. The thing that's brilliant about hip hop is the recontextualization, right? So like when De La Soul did Say No Go, right, on 3 Feet High and Rising, connect that to the Hall & Oates, because the way they use Say No Go is completely in a different context than the original song. You know what I mean? And that and advancing a narrative, a new narrative by using a fragment of an old one in a different context, and to really connect those dots, the present, the future, the past, and then, ain't nothing new under the sun. So this, as at the same time, things are moving on, right? Nothing stays static. So, that kind of thing is a way to connect, I think, audiences, younger audiences, to older music. And also the idea of having, really listening from not a bah humbug place to new music. It's important, to engage with new music and not lecture down about
Exactly.
my day, blah, blah, blah.
I remember early on when I was working in hip hop and I would, sign an artist and we'd, start having conversations and I'd listen with them or talk about the album for the first time. I'd say, yeah, I like that George Clinton sample. And, oh, this Parliament is cool where you have this come in and, oh yeah, this Isaac Hayes thing. And they'd be like shocked I knew this. Like, how did you know where this came from? And because a lot of times at that point, the labels back then didn't even know that these samples were being used. They hadn't started going after them yet.
And thank God they didn't know.
Yeah. And, I've talked to different artists, Herbie Hancock, different people that have been sampled, and asked them what they thought about it. But what you're talking about is educate people about what you're listening to. So, that this is whatever artist it is. And it's bizarre to me that the major labels don't push this concept, because it would help them with catalog, with selling catalog.
Yeah, that's a
And
great point.
how do we convince a label, educate these kids, let them know about these albums, like, was mentioned, what's going on. And, important music.
Yeah, and it pulls back layers and layers for people to explore and go back, and then you kind of go zag.
That album is no less important than John Lennon's Imagine album. It's not in any stretch of the imagination. And I will argue that point with anyone. It's just the majors. I think most of the people there don't care enough about music. They're more concerned about their job, but it would be beneficial to them, to selling back catalog, to encourage this. Unfortunately, they don't, the kids aren't buying CDs, but it would have been brilliant of them in liner notes, instead of editing out where I'm writing about samples, something about samples, to leave that stuff in, or have had a page in the liner notes about where all the samples on the album came from. And, maybe a line or two about each, song that was sampled. And it's just sad it doesn't happen. And does anyone have an idea what we could do?
It's crazy.
Instead of that?
Crazy. Where have all the CD players gone, though? Like, think about that. You can sell us if you got a CD, you actually have no way to play on a current device. They've been taken out of cars, right? You can barely get a USB CD drive,
Right.
a CD drive to digitize the music you have. So the thing is the album is antiquated, but the album has the LP. It's so arcane, and the artwork it's enjoyed a kind of renaissance, because it as an object has become kind of fetishized.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're in a band, you're also a t-shirt company if
Right.
you're going to make it.
Merchandise. So we're coming to an end where we're going to open the floor up for some questions. Danny says there's a couple questions here. I just want to thank everybody. And Danny, I'm going to hand this over to you. What a great conversation, and a lot to think about. Danny, are you here with us? And
Yeah, can you hear me?
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think I am. So I'm going to start with, we've got some coming in from different directions. This is in the chat. This is from Scott Pellegrino. Even though there's 1,000 times more music made in the past 20 years, very little of it has been interesting. Is it possible that roughly 99% of interesting musical territory has already been realized? Do we really need tons more bad new music?
Oh, that's
I know Scott.
Crazy talk.
Stop it, Scott.
He also doesn't miss live music, he says.
Yeah, he doesn't miss live
Yeah.
Is this
one of my favorite
Scott Williams?
curmudgeons.
Did he get hacked?
So are we done with that?
Stop it, Scott. Come on.
Whenever, 99% of the music out there, if I can jump in, we don't hear, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's hard to imagine how to generalize about that.
And even if it's 99% of music that you think might be that way, if you're like us and you love music, we still keep wanting to mine and find the 1%. That's what makes us who we are
Absolutely.
too.
Scott is making one great point.
99%. I want that 1%. I'm hungry for that 1%.
Scott, you know what? All kidding aside, Scott there's one salient point to what Scott said, and that is we're overwhelmed. We have too much
Mhm.
of everything. We have too much of everything, and also we're weirdly enough, and I don't know how to put this. We're manufacturing artists at at an incredible rate, right? It used to be a underground passion of a few extreme people that were willing to do the thing to do this thing. And then it became popularized. It became romanticized. Like the idea of the guitarist as hero became a romantic idea. To be Jimi Hendrix or Jeff Beck or Eric Clapton or Jimmy Page. And that begat generations of people that came from. I was inspired by Jimi Hendrix and Carlos Santana. You know what I mean? And I was inspired by local dudes. And those dudes were inspired by people. People were inspired by Peter Green.
Vernon, yeah. Can you explain to me, because I don't get it. I grew up with probably a lot of the same music, most of the same music you did. I don't know how old you are. I assume we're the same age. A lot of the new quote rock and roll, which I think a lot the stuff the music industry is pushing, a lot of it is horrible. Why aren't kids today that have guitar in these bands, and this has been going on, I think more so the last 10, 15 years, why aren't kids learning how to play guitar solos? Why don't you? Why can't you?
Oh my God!
What the hell is going on?
We've got super, like right now we have hyper guitar right now. I mean, seriously?
Oh, but the labels, what the labels are pushing, you don't hear guitar solos when you listen to a lot of the rock they're pushing. They're pushing bands that they don't have guitar solos.
Well, also virtuosity. Okay, so like it's almost like two. So virtuosity and songwriting are really almost two separate pursuits. Occasionally, you'll have a songwriter who's also a kind of virtuoso, Lindsey Buckingham. Like Lindsey Buckingham plays ass. I mean, he really keeps it hid. But Lindsey Buckingham can go. Right. So there's a number of folks that are like this, that they're more oriented toward songs, but they have chops and that's their thing. Sometimes they don't display that. Other people like the physical act of playing the guitar, and that is the whole trip.
Right.
And the song is a pretext. The song as a pretext for solo. Right. Well, this is a warping of the idea of context. Like, part of the reason why Jimi Hendrix, for me, and a lot of other people, is great is because his songs, mind-blowing guitar player and all that, but The Wind Cries Mary is The Wind Cries Mary. And you realize, though, that Jimi Hendrix had a very problematic relationship with his mom. His mom wasn't. So when you hear A King Has No Wife, it goes right through you because it's coming from something, right? When you hear like a Hal David lyric, like Anyone Who Had a Heart, I mean, I get it. It's the craft, but that song, or like A House Is Not a Home, like that's some broken heart. Or Wichita Lineman. So I'm sorry, like something like a Wichita Lineman, that is about blue collar male loneliness for real. Right. So these are the things that connect beyond. And the question is, and the songwriters, I believe they exist. I think the heartbreaking songwriters out there, who are the people going out, the A&R people, the Alan Lomax or whoever, who's going out to find and vet, and, who's going out through all the thousands and finding that one nugget. It exists, but the thing is, people are overwhelmed. Who's taking the time to do it? That's part of the problem we have. We're overwhelmed. We're under complete assault at all times. Social media, email, gaming, binging. Come on. Come on.
Yeah.
I mean,
let's be real
Steve
about
Vai is a great guitar player. I mean, I could listen to him for days.
Oh yeah.
And it's just the labels just are focusing on so much just trash.
Okay, I'm gonna out Steve Vai right now. You know what? Like, 'cause a long time ago on a tour bus, Stevie said something to me, and I'm gonna say it right now. It's time for you to do that record with Tom Waits.
Wow.
It's time for you. It's time for you, Steve Vai, to do that record with Tom Waits.
Wow.
I'm gonna leave it.
I listen to him all the time.
Okay.
All right. I'm trying to figure out how to go in terms of time here. This is there's these couple that feed off of what Vernon was just saying. And one is, I think when you talk about there being so much, this is a piece of it. How has streaming, Spotify, Apple, Bandcamp changed the music industry for artists, both good and bad?
Money, ripping people off, artists off.
Bandcamp good.
I've had so many artists tell me horror stories about having millions of hits streamed of theirs, and they tell me the exact amount of money. I don't want to mention any names, and I am horrified and some days embarrassed to be associated with the business. I mean, I'm not responsible for that, but thank God. But I don't know, Vernon, you probably can say something about how inequitable it is for an artist.
I would just say the streaming services have been lifting their leg.
Okay.
Pretty much. You know, I mean, the rates are appalling, and it's like they're doing us a favor almost.
Yeah, artists are pissed off
with their attitude. I mean,
yeah.
You know, that's why I say Bandcamp good, streaming bad. You know, Bandcamp, at least people that have the passion, that it's the place to go and hear independent music.
Yeah.
And doing cool, interesting.
I always tell people, do not use streaming services. Do not use that to hear your music. You know, you're just screwing the artists over. And I don't know. I think we need to get that message out to fans, music fans as well. It's a scam for them.
Well, the situation with, say, Spotify, the head of Spotify, Daniel Ek, is worth $5 billion. And Spotify just put forward this program where they will goose your algorithm to get you more listens if you agree to take a lower rate. Now, I don't know how you can get a lower rate, but evidently there's some way you can get an even lower rate, which is just another form of payola. At the same time, but this just reflects what's going on in society, right? And during the pandemic, the wealth of billionaires in America has gone up over $1 trillion. So if we're going to live in a society like that, it's going to be reflected in the music industry. You can't just tinker with the music industry and make it okay while the whole society is set up on the basis that the music industry is currently set
That's
up.
a great point, Lee. I mean, if we were to take one of the takeaway things from today's topic, to me, that's one of them, man.
I do not. Vernon brought up the thing about CD players. I do not believe it is accidental that they're not being marketed to the kids. I do not believe it is. I remember, this is, a lot of people may not know about this. Back in the days, 20s, 30s, 40s, record companies like Sony, which or RCA Victor, they made a certain player, and to play their music, you had to buy their player. And this had the same, it was with 78s and other labels were doing this too then, that were involved in the technology, like Sony, which was then CBS, not that far back, but the major labels have had a hand, like Jimmy Iovine coming out with Dr. Dre's Beats, where you could listen to streaming music. And I do not believe it's an accident that the labels are happy to not have to pay the money for shipping a product to the record stores, to worry about returns, which I'm sure Vernon knows about because they're in everybody's contracts.
Mhm.
and all the other stuff, and having to, well, now there's no more record stores, but it's disgusting.
It's a
I,
little bit crazy. Think about this. Like I'm an Apple user, right? We're
Me too.
communicating. I'm communicating with you on an Apple computer. Now, I think about this. This computer is a tool, and I have a couple of other Apple computers in my audio laboratory. I'm using this to make music, to communicate, right? But this is crazy. Think about it. I'm buying music, say from iTunes. I'm buying music, but I'm also using an Apple product to make music on, which is also giving them money. I have a phone, you know what I mean? That it's weird when you think about the money. It's like the money all goes to Apple.
but they will tell you, if you read the fine print, you did not buy that music, Vernon.
Right.
You are renting it.
Right. License. It's amazing. It's talk about Steely Dan, the royal scam.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me ask one question. We're going to have to wrap up, and we need to ask one question before we toss out. It's kind of a Hail Mary question. If the music industry as it exists disappeared tomorrow, right? How would we do things differently to get music out there, get it made and get it out there to people who need to hear it?
Well, I mean, the Wu-Tang, Wu-Tang made a record, like one record, they sold it to one guy who turned out to be an a-hole. So, I mean, and really, the whole craze, the NFT, non-fungible token thing, is basically the evolution of that idea. They made this one album that nobody's heard, but they put it up so, like, you know what, a rich person could buy the one thing. And this NFT thing, which is like, people are paying $1 million for a tweet, like that is happening in the absurdity. As Lee talks about the absurdities now have leaked from race into the overall economy. So now the non-fungible token craze, how do I do it? How do I get it? Because the art world is being set on fire by it. Now it's like the sons of Leon had done that. So now this has become the next gold rush. And now, because of technology, this is like the third gold rush that we're living through. Now it's this kind of, the crypto album. And that's kind of where it's become. So it's like everybody needs to find their rich person that's going to pay for all their stuff.
Yeah. Or like, I know Bernard Fowler, for instance, he did a fabulous album called The Burra. I don't know if anyone here has heard it, but he's a great artist. I really love his stuff. I was listening to My Friend Sin last night. I think that was the title of My Friend Sin. Anyway, he crowdfunded. He did a GoFundMe, and he actually raised money for the Burra, and that's how that album came out. He crowdfunded. Yep. And I know, back to what Lee was saying, people don't have money to give, but that was one way. But I think a lot of people like Vernon have enough fans. There are people like me that would be willing to pay to make sure these records keep coming out.
Well, and it's about feeding content. It's that constant, when you work
supply and demand.
It's a constant feeding of content to keep people engaged. And I have clients too that they're tired of feeding content. Sometimes they just want to stay in a creative space and let them do that, and not be so responsible for this constant.
Yeah.
Feed the machine. So,
but anyway, unfortunately, it's the music business.
Here we are.
There's a weird thing, like this whole thing with influencers is baffling as well, because there are people who are really famous to people, like there are people who are like have 1 million followers that you've
Oh,
never heard of,
yeah.
right? That's a whole other component of this thing, right? So at one point, talking about influences, like we're talking about DJs, right?
That's how what's her name got signed.
Frankie Crocker and Scott Muni, they were kind of the proto influencers. They were kind of mavericks. They did what they wanted to do, in the wide open plains of FM radio. That's where you would hear. That's how I heard Dark Side of the Moon. You know what I mean?
Wow.
But
Amazing.
gradually what's happened is, the wide open spaces, get sold off in parcels and become developments, and that's what, and that's kind of what a process that happens all the time. And now this whole thing of influence is really interesting. Are artists influencers? Can that happen? And is that, that's also a province for much younger artists that are engaged in the technology. This is all they know.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
hopefully they use that influenciness for social change and justice. And that's what our hope needs to be, that if it's going to be the influencer, let them be awake.
Yeah.
Let them not be evil. Oh dear, that ship done crash landed on the other side of Pluto.
There you go.
Hey, Mike, Lee, do you have any final words before we?
I think that's a good way to end it.
All right.
That's a great
Here's
time.
my final thought. A quote. Dealing with the label is like dealing with people on heroin. They never pick up the phone. They don't do a thing for you, and they make the simplest things so hard. Hank Williams III.
Thank you. That's great. It's a great place to end. Thank you all so much. Lee, Vernon, Mike, Phyllis, Val,
Thank you.
in this. Really appreciate you all being here.
And thanks,
Good.
Dave.
Yes.
Yes,
thank
and
you,
thank you,
Dave.
Dave.
That was amazing. I hate to wrap it up, but someone said when we were talking before we went on the air that I'm the authoritarian asshole. So I guess I can play that role now.
Yeah, you are.
And that
You
was
revel in it. You revel in it.
that was Charles Hughes who gave a great introduction. But no, this was outstanding. I didn't remember where I was for a minute. Typically, I'm moderating panels these days about streaming video and streaming music. And so, Vernon, when you mentioned latency, I'm like, hey, I got some answers for that. Yeah, latency is huge right now. Anyway, before we sign off, I forgot to mention in my introduction, the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. We're putting these panels on for free. It's taken a lot of work. We're loving doing it, but we hope you're enjoying it. And if you have a mind to throw a few dollars anywhere, the Kristen Ann Carr Fund is the foundation that Dave Marsh and Barbara Carr set up almost 30 years ago, I believe, in honor of their late daughter, Kristen, who died from a rare sarcoma. And the foundation funds sarcoma research and sarcoma fellows who work across the country to bring care to places that need it. So please, there's a link on the Land of Hope and Dreams website. If you can contribute to that, you'd be doing the world some more good. Thanks again to everyone today. Thanks again to the audience for coming and joining. This will be on YouTube soon. And in just about an hour, we've got our next panel on music and the media, where I'm sure some of these topics will continue. So hopefully we'll see some of y'all then.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. See you.